Okay, hey guys, welcome to my game design pitch. My name is Rafal Skrotkowski and my student number is 110042. Now the game I'll be presenting today, it's called Valdi's Descent. And the subtitle, the whole premise of the game is the fact that it's a quest which effectively ends up becoming a new genre in itself. The whole entire game was, essentially the idea behind the game was inspired by an anime, Cowboy Bebop. And what the anime tried to do was it tried to innovate by essentially incorporating many different kinds of genres and in a way sort of becoming a completely different genre in itself. And that's kind of what the game tries to do. It incorporates various styles and various gameplay elements from many different kinds of games into one, and it tries to create a completely new and different genre in a way. Now, when I created Valdi's Descent, when I was going through the process of creating Valdi's Descent, I wasn't entirely sure what kind of game I wanted to do. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a platformer or a third-person game, or I don't know, maybe a turn-based game. So I stumbled upon the idea of incorporating elements that have inspired me throughout my artistic career and pretty much throughout my life. And I started with basically memories that inspired me as a kid, and things that I was really inspired as a kid. Being things such as Judge Dredd, Terminator series, Mad Max, Dirty Harry. These are all movies that I used to watch as a kid with my dad. And these were like huge driving influences for me as a kid. Running around playing cowboys and robbers and things like that. And I think it's possibly what actually sparked my interest initially when it came to design and art, where you saw these crazy characters and you wondered how they could exist in reality and how you could create characters like that. Eventually, from there on I got into my teen years, where I eventually took up art as a kid, and it's where I finally learned how to draw. And I drew a lot of inspiration at that time from animes. I went through an anime craze like many other people, and kids my age at that time. Huge driving influences for me at this point in my life was Cowboy Bebop, Afro Samurai, and Akira. These are all different kinds of animes. And they all had this gritty, stylized element to them, where they were cartoonish, but at the same time they felt real and truly like down to earth. And then another influence that I took when I started creating Valdi's Descent was my current influences. And my current driving influences is I've really gone into this sort of neo-noir-esque art style, where I draw a lot of influence from old school greats such as Blade Runner, Drive, and more recently something like Bioshock Infinite. And I basically took all these elements and I tried to come up with an idea. And one thing that I realized very early on is that I want the game to be a deeply narrative-driven experience, where the reason the player goes forward and he wants to complete the game and he wants to get to the next point is the narrative. It's addictive, it's driving, characters are intriguing, not only the characters but the NPCs themselves. You want to stop and you want to listen to two NPCs talking to each other, because they've got this weird vibe about them, of, their life seems interesting from what they say. And this is something I feel not many RPGs tend to get right. And not many games in general, narrative-driven experiences, get right. There's very few that I can name that have gotten this right, and I feel those games are absolutely amazing. One that comes to mind is possibly Bioshock. And I remember when I first loaded up Bioshock and I got up to the massive city up in the clouds, and I just stood there and I looked at the amazing scenery, and I stood there and I listened to the conversations that the NPCs were having with each other. And that's what I want this game to be. I want this to be an immersive experience where you want to be part of this world, you want to know what drives this place. And because this game is such a massive culmination of these different themes, I can't really define its genre specifically. So the question pops up, what is Valdi's Descent? And seeing as it was inspired by Cowboy Bebop, I thought I'd use their definition because it probably rings the most true. Valdi's Descent is bebop jazz. Now, for those of you that don't know what bebop jazz is, let me just play you some. Bebop jazz is essentially a very complex combination of sounds characterized by very complex rhythms and harmonies. And that's essentially what my game is trying to be. It's trying to be this very complex combination of different narratives, different genres, and I'm trying to incorporate them into this big old mess of ideas that ends up creating an unforgettable experience for the player. But if I were to try and define Valdi's as a specific game genre, I'd probably define it as an action-adventure investigation, stealth shooter, hack and slash sci-fi, spaghetti western narrative RPG. Now that's a hell of a tongue twister, and that really goes to show what my game is going for. It's a third-person action adventure and incorporates various elements from third-person shooters, hack and slash games, and it's, as I mentioned, it's very heavily narrative-driven, but it's also very much focused on investigation and morality within the world and players' choices and how they approach different situations. And I did mention it's a mashup of different kinds of elements, and the two elements that probably come through the most in terms of the narrative and the genre is the spaghetti western mobster tropes that are evident throughout the world and that you'll encounter along your way. Now that I've explained more or less what the game is, what's the concept behind it? What do you do in the world? Well, players will play one of two characters. The first character they will play is a character named Val, hence the first part of Valdi. And Val, he's a retired ISP officer. Now, ISP is essentially like inter-solar system, like police force. And he's retired. He was disgruntled with the police force. He eventually got fired because people thought he was corrupt. And now he works as a bounty hunter, and he goes around, catching various criminals, trying to lock them up and that. But recently he caught wind of one particular criminal, a mobster by the name of Maud. Now, Maud was responsible for murdering Val's family, essentially. So Val will essentially, in the whole entire game, attempt to try and get to Maud in order to kill him, or effectively enact revenge. And Val's gameplay will be very heavy and clunky, and he'll have a difficult time, stealthing past enemies, and he'll have to use you as the player will have to use his detective skills to proceed forward in the game so you can locate your targets. And then the second player that you will be controlling is Dai. Now, the second player you'll be controlling is Dai, and she'll have a very flowing gameplay. She'll be very light, very nimble, and she won't be the greatest in combat, and you'll often have to use very sweet talking and bribes to try and get yourself out of sticky situations, or just try and run. And I created these two characters because I really wanted to emphasize, the different flavors evident in the game. And whereas the one character is like this brute where you can go in guns blazing and kill the enemies that confront you, the other character is not. The other character can do other things. She can jump up buildings, she can perform parkour, she can easily stealth past people. And it creates this, this interesting dynamic. And basically, whenever you complete a certain area with one of the characters, it'll jump to the other character's perspective. And how that works, I'll get into a bit later exactly. But for the moment, I'll just quickly want to show you more or less how the gameplay of each character would look like. The first gameplay, basically, I've drawn inspiration from Gears of War. And this is pretty much how Val would play like. If quality corroborates.
Let's go. Let's go.
So you'll have this very heavy, clunky gameplay. It almost feels though you can't jump, but you'll be able to bash open doors. You'll be able to vault over different elements. Obviously, pick up ammunition, inspect different objects around the universe. And one thing which differentiates Val's gameplay from Dive is that you can use cover, as they're doing here. You'll be able to shoot from cover, lean around cover, pretty much like in Gears of War. So that's going to be the one character's gameplay, that's Val's. I'm now moving on to Dai's gameplay. Now, Dai is essentially a thief. So, needless to say, I sort of went and just grabbed from Thief to get an idea of how her gameplay would function.
Look at his feet! Look at the little shuffle.
Look at his feet!
And she'll be able to climb over buildings and sneak around various areas you wouldn't be able to with Val. Climb into windows to try and find clues and things like that. She'll also be able to pick locks, for example, or pickpocket people to try and get her objective quest completed. And this gives you an idea of how part of the gameplay will work. But the gameplay will actually be a combination of Thieves and Journeys. And what I wanted to take from Journey's gameplay was this idea that your character is sort of floating and flows through the landscape seamlessly. Basically, to contrast Val's gameplay of this heavy, clunky, grounded feeling. So I just combine this with Thief and get an idea of how Dai's gameplay is meant to be. Moving on. Now the question emerges, what drives players forward through this whole entire experience? Now if you guys were paying attention, I'm sure you guys have caught it already, it's the narrative. This whole game is centered on the narrative and about the lore of the universe and the world this game takes place in. I'll just read this part here. The game starts off with a cutscene that unfolds on parchment with ink dabs as the protagonist narrates. I got this idea essentially from Borderlands. So you'll have parchment like this, and you'll have ink dabs dropping on, and you'll have basically pictures being drawn out in ink and line of the character, and then slowly that'll materialize into the actual game itself, so the game graphics. And that'll eventually be the intro. And so it starts with this ink dab on parchment, and Val, the character you'll start playing as, the weight lying on a cold stone floor. He'll glance up and you'll see this massive monolith in front of him. It sort of resembles like a pitchfork, but it gleams in the sun and it's the light is almost blinding. Slowly he'll remember why he's here, what he's come to do, and he can finally join his family once he completes this quest. He'll walk into this monolith and he'll confront Maud, the target he's been trying to kill. And what happens is, before he confronts Maud, the player will be presented with 3 various options. These will be in the form of 3 characters. There'll be a fox, a dragon, and a lion. And they'll approach the player and they'll offer him options. The fox will say, "Come with me and we can have some fun." The dragon will approach him, "Come with me and you can finally get your bloodthirst, you can get your revenge." The lion approaches him and says, "Walk away now, or, face your doom." And then players will be able to decide which of the 3 they want to side with. Once they side with them, they will proceed to confront Maud. Depending on who they sided with will completely change the way the next scene looks. So if they chose the lion, it'll be it'll almost feel like a courtroom that they're walking into. If they chose the dragon, it'll be like a barbaric room they're walking into. And if they chose the fox, it'll be a very playful room. Walk in there's arcade machines and things such as that. Then after that, another cutscene will unfold and players again will have the choice. Do they kill Maud or do they let him live? At this point, this option doesn't really matter too much in the players. Either way, it'll unfold exactly the same way. Maud will pretty much say, well, he'll have a maniacal laugh and he'll say, "Ha ha, you've fallen into my trap. Now it's time to play my game." After which players will wake in a desert landscape and with a note next to them that says, "The fox is your only way to come and find me. Find her." And the fox is, in this case, Dai, the second character you play as. And essentially the general narrative of the game is that Val is trying to find Dai to try and get to Maud so that he can finally get his revenge. And at the same time, Dai is actually trying to escape from Maud, and she knows that someone's on her tracks and she's trying to get away from them. And Dai's objective is she's trying to find this place, the Forge. Now she assumes there's this massive treasure in there. There's something in there that Maud wants to keep hidden from everyone else, and she wants to reach it so that she can maybe blackmail him or escape his clutches. So an interesting dilemma will develop in the narrative, because the player is trying to catch Dai, and at the same time they're trying to escape Val. So they're trying to catch and run away from themselves at the same time. And it'll be quite interesting to see how that develops. But there's something players won't know about the game, at least until they finish it. Spoilers, but what players are unaware of is the fact that Val is in fact Maud, and he's experiencing post-traumatic stress. Dai is the only person that actually knows this, and she's been trying to help him, but she's pretty much gotten fed up with his nonsense. And as Val gets closer to Dai, he'll start to remember more and more, until eventually he does reach her, and basically his world shatters as she reveals to him that he's Maud. And all the previous actions you've performed in the game, they'll be revealed as to why people treated you the way they treated you. And players will begin to understand the decisions that the character took. And this narrative and the whole idea of this came from a game named Spec Ops. And in Spec Ops, you ended up playing as a US Marine commando who was sent to infiltrate Dubai and kill this warlord. But at the end of the game, it turns out that the character you were playing is the warlord, and that's essentially what Val D is trying to achieve as well. Because when I played this game, that narrative was absolutely spectacular, and at the end of the game, I felt so bad. And although, you know, maybe it's not the best idea to try and make the player feel bad, but I feel it's an interesting spin on, you know, the traditional RPG narrative. And along the way, questions will players will essentially encounter various areas of moral ambiguity where, you know, players may have to make a difficult decision. For example, shoot the kid or let Dai escape. Guess they're going to be shooting the kid because, you know, they want to get on the narrative or something like that. And what the game tries to essentially show is that in this world, in the world of Valdi, there is not really any good or right. It's all just shades of grey. And this may make people feel very depressed at the end of the game, but I feel it's an interesting narrative that isn't explored too often in games. So, moving on to the gameplay. What is it exactly that you do as a player? Well, firstly, I'll get on with the movement. As I mentioned, Val's got a heavy, clunky movement, very similar to Gears of War. You can bash through walls, you can vault over objects, shoot behind cover. Dai, on the other hand, is very nimble. She can use parkour, she can climb, she's got a grappling hook that she can get up to high places and escape enemies. And then both characters as well will have the ability to sneak past enemies and that, which I'll get onto in a later section. Now the combat. The combat will incorporate hack and slash and shooter elements. Essentially, when you've got a gun equipped or a ranged weapon, it'll function like it does in most third-person shooters, where you can aim down sights, you can reload, you can throw grenades, things like that. Whereas when you switch to a melee weapon, you'll no longer be able to aim down sights or throw grenades and things like that, but you'll be able to dodge enemy attacks, you'll be able to parry attacks, and things such as that. Now, Val mostly relies on guns. He's a gunslinger, he's a traditional cowboy, he's a badass. And as a result, his combat relies a lot on taking cover in combat, firing from range, you know, knocking people out. Whereas Dai is very nimble and fast, but she's also very vulnerable. And she's not exactly the kind of character you want to be taking into a combat situation. Because yeah, against 1 or 2 enemies, no problem. More than that, and the player will probably end up dying. But she does have throwing knives at her disposal, a dagger which she can use in close quarters. And unlike Val, who can take cover in combat and things such as that, Val can, you know, jump over enemies. She can leap on their heads. She can easily dodge out of the way. So as I mentioned, it's meant to, you know, the whole game is meant to emphasize like the complete two opposites of the two characters. And then moving on to another gameplay element, stealth. Now stealth in the game will work slightly differently to stealth in other games, but at the same time similarly. It won't use this whole system where, you know, enemies have like have a meter above their heads that tells you how aware of your presence they are. No, players are going to have to figure that out for themselves. Is the enemy looking at you? Should you take cover? Should you, should you go through that building there? And players are going to have to really observe their surroundings and really pay attention to the world around them in order to use stealth properly. When it comes to stealth, you'll be able to do a number of various things. You'll be able to hide in cover, you'll be able to maybe hide in a closet or something. You'll be able to listen at a door and pretty much look through the keyhole as well to see if there's anyone on the other side. You might even be able to find a camera terminal and, you know, see if there's someone around. And you'll also be able to basically pick locks and pickpocket guards who are possibly sleeping or something. But I'll get to I'll get back to that point as it ties in with this investigation element of the gameplay, which is my next point. Now, the key elements the game will focus around is investigation. And investigation in Valdi works in a very interesting way. I took a lot of inspiration from the game Vanishing of Ethan Carter. Now, I'll play you about a minute of the slot and then I'll cut to the gameplay. Because this game is quite similar to what I want Valdi to look and feel like.
Ethan Carter, I didn't know. But you know who I was. When the police won't help you, and the police don't believe you, you call on Paul Prospero. You call on me. If you're a kid like Ethan, you're right. What I do. Ethan the other started out just like any other female. But soon you imagine things no one really should have started out just like any other. There are places that exist that very few people can see. Ethan could have drawn that. I had met his red creek valley, yet already I could feel its darkness reaching out from that. Finding Ethan Carter was already as easy as knocking on his door. I was too late for that. To find Ethan.
And I'll just jump to the gameplay quickly, just to give you an idea. Okay, so now a very cool element in Ethan Carter was the way the investigation worked. And basically the objective of this game was to find Ethan Carter. And the objective of Valdi will be, to find Dai. And it's pretty cool the way it works, because when you approach something, it'll give you these small pop-ups that give you hints as to what you need to find. And that's the way I want Valdi to work, where you approach something and there's a small pop-up. It's very subtle and it's not like a big glowing objective arrow. Let me cut to a better pointer. And basically the way it worked in Ethan Carter is once you solve these mysteries, once you put together all the clues, you got a flashback, an idea of where you had to go next. And I want Valdi to work the same way, where you put together various different puzzles and you get the character gives a sort of monologue and you get a bit of a narration of where you have to go next. Great. Okay. Here it gives you an idea of how the gameplay could possibly, it shows you another idea of the puzzle elements that could be in the game. Various colors, various objects that stand out completely, and then you can solve them to have like a flashback or an idea of the narrative where you have to go next. So investigation in the game will effectively use various symbols and various clues as to where you have to go next. At the same time, we'll use a lot of visual cues, such as an object looking out of place, or someone wearing something incredibly bright, whereas everyone else wears something that's dark and black. And this basically tries to steer the player in the correct direction without giving them an objective marker. And this is all to help immersion, because it's not entirely believable, but it's more believable than having a massive arrow above a character's head that says go to him, speak to him. Now another thing that will tie into the investigation in the game is... Okay, I'll speed up. Another thing that'll tie into the investigation in the game is players' interaction and choices. Players will be able to interact with all NPCs in the world, and all NPCs will have different personalities and dispositions in the way they act to a player. All the player's choices in a particular dialogue will affect the gameplay. So it's not a simple question of, you swear someone off and suddenly, it doesn't really matter. He might pull a gun on you for doing that, or you betray someone, or if you help someone, they'll help you. They'll give you, they'll give you clues and notes and things such as that. And all of these systems will tie into a karma system that the whole game will be essentially controlled by. And the karma system, it's a 5-tiered system that works on basically the good deeds a character does and the evil deeds. The more people you kill, the more the slider will go towards evil. The more people help, the more the slider will go towards good. Same with combat and stealth and investigation. And all 5 of these elements will combine together to influence the narrative, how people react to you, and basically the more towards one side of a particular slider the player goes, the harder that particular element will be. So if you go towards the evil side of the slider, interacting with evil players will be easy, but helping a good player won't be easy. Whereas if you go to all the way on the far side of the combat slider, combat will become very difficult, but stealth will be borderline, just a walk in the park. On the other hand, investigation is just pretty much, it just goes from 0 to 100. As you unlock more clues and you go further, the investigation just becomes harder. And this system, it's basically aimed to create a gameplay where the player has to either decide, okay, I want a challenging experience, so I'm just going to stick to combat or stealth, or I'm struggling a bit, let me see if I can juggle it, but do a bit of stealth, do a bit of combat, and it's meant to try and get players to play every part of the game differently. Now moving on to the art style. The game will be a cel-shaded neo-noir game. I've taken a lot of influences from games such as Borderlands, Prince of Persia's Sands of Time, as well as Cyberpunk 2077, which is an upcoming neo-noir game which absolutely looks brilliant. So a lot of the visuals will pretty much be very similar to this at the bottom, just with a cel-shaded, cartoony look and feel to them. The UI menus in the game. Here's just an illustration of how the main menu may look. And the background image here will change depending on where in the story you are. And it will be animated, so like the cat there will be walking, the sun will be rising and setting, clouds moving, etc. And you've got your standard game options, new game, continue, etc. Menus in the game, when you're actually playing, they'll appear as a mixture of sci-fi and fantasy. So this here is actually, it's a computer screen inside a book that you open. And this basically just shows how it would look. Objectives, map, and your inventory. The health bar and the ammo counter, they won't be part of a UI. The game won't really have a UI when you're playing. It'll all be incorporated into the character. So weapons will have a heads-up display, and your health bar will actually be on the back of your character in a third-person perspective. And as the health drops, as you can see on the bottom there, which says health indicator, basically the bar will start to turn black. Now, a cool thing that I'd like to add with this health bar is, as your character finds new weapons or new gear, the logo actually changes. So you can actually customize the way your health bar looks. Okay. Lastly, moving on to the look and feel of the world. The game takes place on a planet called Sol. Sol's a frontier world. It's a desert devoid of any life, well, except for the humans that have settled there. And its capital city, known as Sol 13, or simply Sol to those that live in it, is where most of this game takes place in. And the general look of the feel of the world is a sci-fi western with neo-noir elements. So sci-fi elements shown in this picture. You'll have basically a sprawling city metropolis with bright lights, and that at the further into the city of Seoul you go. On the outskirts of Seoul, you'll have a more apocalyptic, frontier, western feeling to the game. And then generally the gameplay and the narrative itself will have neo-noir and detective themes and the sort of brooding, foreboding feeling to them. And lastly, in conclusion, whose side will you be on? Who's the real bad guy, and is the truth simply black and white or a muddy mess of brown? Oops. Any questions? Oh yeah. Cool.